Hi everyone, Susan Storm here, and today I'm going to be exploring introverted thinking with you. And I'm just waiting here for my partner, Denzel Mensah, to hop on, and we're going to be talking about that together. He's kind of my partner in typology. He's an ENFJ and I'm an INTJ, and we are going to be going through all 8 cognitive functions. We've already talked about introverted feeling and extroverted feeling, and if you haven't seen those yet, you can access those videos on my YouTube account in the Lives tab. So, hello, Cutthroat Beast. I recognize you from our last stream. Thanks for being here. And if you're on and you want to say hi, say hello. We are excited to be here to actually interact with you. It's really fun for us for this to be an interactive experience and not just something where I'm hopping on and monologuing for everybody. So I want to hear your questions. I want to hear your thoughts. And so if you have any as we're going along, be sure to leave them. I may not answer them right away. I might wait till the end of the presentation, because I always come up with a little bit of a presentation to do to go over the basics of the cognitive function. But I want to hear what you think, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to you as much as I can on here. So, yeah, if you're tuned in and you have any thoughts, be sure to leave them in the comments. And if there's any problems, if you can't hear me or anything like that, just let me know. I've got my husband over to the side who will probably give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if something is wrong. So, hi, Heather. Thank you for being here. I'm excited you're here because as an ISFJ, you have tertiary introverted thinking. So, this is going to be really fun for you. And Denzel just joined us. Hi,
I'm here.
Denzel. We can.
Hello.
No, we can hear you. I meant like the
Oh,
last
okay.
time. The last time we can hear you. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I've been running around a little bit with sessions and Q&As. I was on Personality Hackers Q&A and everything. But anyway, yeah, we're good.
Awesome. Well, Denzel is a great friend of mine. I think we've known each other for 7, 8 years, maybe. It's
Probably
been
a
a long
while.
time. And he's a personality hacker trained and someone that I really trust when it comes to understanding type as well as profiling people. And Denzel is an ENFJ. You have introverted thinking in your function stack. It's your
Correct.
inferior function, but it's still something that you highly value. So I'm excited to get your perspective on introverted thinking here. Um, are we ready to
Yeah,
just
it's
jump
actually
right
my
in?
favorite. Yeah,
It's your
yeah,
favorite
let's go.
function?
It is.
So tell us why it's your favorite function.
Honestly, I think that ever since I found out that it was my Achilles heel, then it just became more apparent like, oh, then this is the function that I not only want to work on, but I also want to I guess I want to make sure that it never crosses me. You know what I'm saying? And so even though it's my inferior function, I want it to I don't ever want it to become like obvious that like, oh yeah, oh yeah, Denzel and it's very clear that he has like introverted thinking as his inferior. And I think also having it as an inferior function, I've noticed how much I needed to value it more as I've grown up, because a lot of the problems that I've faced in life was due to me not paying as much attention to it when I was younger. And now that I've been actually keying in on it, and like now I've doubled down on introverted thinking. I'm never going to be as good as a TP type, but I definitely have integrated it a lot, and I'm paying a lot more attention to it. And for that reason, then I've been seeing like how it's stopping a lot of the things I used to struggle with in the past. And it's so beneficial in that sense. And I appreciate people who have it up higher because they usually say the things that I used to not be able to say because I was too like nervous of how it was going to affect people, because I had extroverted feeling and everything. But now it's like, oh no, I can say those things too. Um, and I'm also able to critically think in similar fashion. So yeah.
Thank you, Denzel. I love hearing that. Actually, I have my ENFJ sister visiting, so we've been talking a lot about introverted thinking when it's inferior, and I think it's a really amazing thing. And I think it's a misconception that you cannot ever use your inferior function well. I think that I've seen that with Denzel and other EFJs that you actually can really harness that, and the more you know about it, the easier it is to like kind of practice with it in your day to day life, which is why this is so important. So
Mhm.
let's jump into the presentation of introverted thinking. I just made some slides to kind of guide us through the process of understanding it. Um, so getting to basics, introverted thinking is a judging function. Judging means it's a decision making function. So when you are faced with a decision and you're trying to figure out what you should do, if you are a thinking perceiving type, introverted thinking is where you're going to go first. Um, Judging functions aid in making decisions, evaluating information, prioritizing value, making should statements, forming our view of how the world should operate. Types who value introverted thinking are the ISTPs, INTPs, ESTPs, ENTPs, ISFJs, INFJs, ESFJs, and ENFJs. Now, all the other personality types, we all use introverted thinking, all 16 types. But these 8 types in this list, these are the types that really value it. It's something that they are going to consciously use more frequently. So, how does introverted thinking help with decisions and evaluations? Well, it asks, is this accurate? Or what are the logical priorities here? It's less focused on, like, if you're an extroverted feeling type, less focused on how are people going to be emotionally impacted or what are the social values in the situation, and more what's actually accurate or true or what's logically consistent right here. Um, it seeks to understand how things work and it wants to fill holes in mental models, frameworks, and blueprints. So it wants to have a thorough, deep understanding of how things works and how mental models and frameworks work. It's not happy with just having a little bit of information and going off of that. It wants to know, it wants to have all the like information accurately categorized inside their own mind. So sometimes I get asked this question when I'm describing introverted thinking. People ask me, what is a mental model? Like, what does that even mean? Like, especially if you're not a type that values introverted thinking very strong, you might be like, what is a mental model? What is a inner framework? We throw these things around in typology, and sometimes it can be kind of confusing. People are like, I don't even know what that means. So it could be a mental model is like a piece of software. It's like a piece of software that acts as a mental shortcut. So even Myers-Briggs in some ways can be kind of like a mental model. Like the fact that we can categorize people into these 16 types helps us understand interactions quickly rather than having to approach each individual person and figure out them out in this really long, drawn out process. You can make these shortcuts. Other mental models include like the redundancy or the hedonic adaptation or the steel man. The steel man, you might have heard of straw man. That's where you're like arguing against a very weak version of someone's position. Whereas a steel man would be arguing against very strong or taking the opinion of someone who's debating you, but making it as powerful and strong as it could be. So there's all these different types of mental models that people use, and sometimes we're using them without even knowing we're doing it. But introverted thinking types really like mental models. They tend to rely on many different mental models in order to make their thinking as accurate as possible. Introverted thinking cares about principles. So, well developed introverted thinking maintains internal principles, fundamental truths that are based on deep logical analysis. Another question that, well, here's a quick example. Um, an introverted thinking type once told me, I believe in radical honesty. I believe in this because if I lie, then people will lie to me. If I lie, you can't trust me, and we won't have clear data with which to make our decisions. This is an example of a principle that an introverted thinking type would have. Another question I get a lot is what's the difference between values and principles? Because we talk a lot about values and principles in the Myers Briggs world. We talk a lot about values when it comes to feeling types and principles when it comes to thinking perceiving types. So, what is even the difference between values and principles? So, a value is what we believe is personally important. It's an opinion. Values are based on ideologies, they're often malleable and they're subjective. So, if I were to say, abortion is wrong, like I really firmly believe it's wrong, like that would be more of a value statement. It's an opinion. It's not based on like either side of that argument is a more value based. A principle is something that we see as a fundamental truth that lies the foundation for a belief, behavior, or change of reasoning, and they are unchanging. So the idea that, well, if I lie to you, you're going to lie to me, that's very logical. It's not like there's not a lot of emotion behind it. It's just this is what it is. So therefore, I'm not going to lie about people to lie to people. If I think that killing people is okay, then there's a higher chance. If I live in a world where killing people is okay, then there's a higher chance that I could be killed by somebody. It's more detached than what you see with values. I'm just going to give Denzel a moment. Do you have any more thoughts? Because this is one that I feel like I hear a lot about, like what's values, what's principles, because there's a lot of people who are torn between whether they're feeling perceivers or thinking perceivers. So, do you have any thoughts, Denzel, on the values versus principles? How to help clarify that for people.
That's actually I was actually really intently listening to you just now. And I was like, because that's also something that interestingly enough, TI or introverted thinking is about making distinctions and like really like clarifying in that way. And so I think that the way that you were just explaining like that distinction between like values and principles and everything like that's very important. And that's something the like that specific distinction was something that I've kind of wondered about myself. And so to articulate the different, it's like I understand it intuitively, but to articulate it comfortably right now, yeah, I don't think that I'd do any better of a job than what you were already presenting. In fact, I really, yeah, I really enjoyed it. But like the best way that I could put it is that, yeah, like a principle is kind of like the idea uh like the Spider-Man thing. Like if you like with whom much is given, much is required, or like if with great power comes great responsibility. Like that's like a principle that you have,
Mhm.
whereas like a value might be something along the lines of like it is important to help people, like and it I feel like it kind of like sounds the same, but it's coming from a different place. Like a principle is more this is what I mean by like to articulate it. It's kind of like interesting, but like a principle is more of just like, no, this is just what makes sense, and that's what TI is about. Like TI is not emotional in that sense. That's not to say that people who use TI are not emotional, but the function in and of itself is unemotional. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, like the like XYZ ABC, like it just does the math. Whereas like a
Yeah.
value is like passionate. Like that's where it's like it's coming from like, no, like we won't lie to people. We won't kill people. We won't do abortion or whatever. But then a principle is just kind of like this is how it just makes sense to me in the world. And that's just what it is. You know
Yeah,
what I
there's a
mean?
lot less like emotion usually behind a principle, but it's still it's like a guiding star that you keep, in front of you, and it's not changing. Where
Precisely.
values can change. You can have some because they're more based on your opinions and your passions and things like that, and your ideologies, which those can change. And because principles are usually grounded in a lot of like sensibility and logic, it's harder to really change them. I mean, saying, well, if I lie to people, they're not going to trust me, so therefore I'm not going to lie. That's so common sense. You can say that without any emotion, and it's going to be a guiding star in your life and a good one.
Yeah.
And
That's funny. That's
most people have
actually
a
literally one of
combination of
mine.
those. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a great one to have. So I hope that helps people if you're like, man, am I more like a values person or am I more a principles person? I mean, we all have both. We all have both values
Yeah.
and principles. But for
I think
TPs,
I
there
think
tends to be more of a detached, like principle focus about how they live rather than that passionate, value driven side that is more common with the feeling perceiving types.
Yeah, I think that that is actually like a great example because um like FI users, introverted feeling users are more likely to have values, whereas like TI users introverted thinking users are more likely to have principles. And so for me, even though I have TI as the fourth slot, lying is a huge principle of mine. Like I always say that I I refuse to tell straight out like lies. I admit I will have loopholes. I will omit information. I will avoid the question, stuff like that. But like if you're like asking me something, I like direct question, I refuse to like lie because I don't want it to be a boy who cried wolf type of situation where it's like now it's like, no, I know I lied before, but this time I'm telling the truth. I don't want that. Like I want my record clean of that. Whereas like for someone who just has it as a value rather than a principle, then it's less about like, oh, my record needs to be clean and I need people like to trust me or whatever because this is just like a guiding star. And it's more of like a if I lie, I'm gonna feel horrible. Like it's just
Mhm.
it's something more like innate and like emotionally driven in that sense. And so like as a principle, if I break that, then it's less emotional and it's more just like, I freaking broke my record. I freaking broke my streak. Or like now that's like one other person who might not trust me in the future, especially when it like really counts. Whereas like for a value, then it's like, oh man, like I broke my integrity here with this.
Yeah.
And so I think that that could be an example of uh, a principle versus like a value and like how it feels a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denzel. I think that's a really great example. And then I have a couple comments here. Heather says, principles are like rules to me. Values are more based on what makes me feel good about me. And yeah, values, there's it's what you personally believe matters and is important. And principles that do feel a little bit more like these are my personal rules for life. And then Cutthroat Beast, who has ENTP preferences, says, if I go by if, then, or cause and effect, similar to programming code. And I think a lot of thinking perceivers will relate to that. It's like, well, yeah, this makes sense. If I lie, people are going to lie to me or they're not going to trust me. If I kill people, I have a chance of being killed. Like it's just logical. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heather and Cutthroat Beast. I always feel so funny saying that for your comments on that. It actually is really helpful. All right, so I think we've kind of clarified the principles versus values idea pretty well at this point. So let's move on to common features of introverted thinking. So, introverted thinking organizes the inner world by creating logical categories. It builds an internal framework to structure and guide analysis, and it seeks internal precision and understanding. So, the way you can look at this is and this is something my husband, who is an ESTP, describes his brain kind of like a library of filing cabinets. And like you go to the filing cabinet you want when you want to get information, and then you look and there's further deeper and deeper layers of subcategories within major categories. So there might be like bugs. Well, then let's go to the beetle category. And then there's a ladybug category. And then there's the different types of ladybugs. But it's like that about everything. There's all these categories. And how are they all connected? What's the, how can I use this inner framework of logical rules, theories, information to make very precise, thoroughly understood decisions? Um, Introverted thinking sees logical relationships. So if A, then B, kind of exactly what Cutthroat Beast just said. Wants to know exactly how everything works. Introverted thinking constantly creates and refines their internal framework to make space for new information. So, say you're an INTP and you do computer programming, and there's a new software that you have to start using. Well, then you're going to keep refining your framework of how software works with this new information, and you're going to try to understand everything you can about it so you can further and further refine in your mind how it all works together. So here's some quotes about introverted thinking from people who are experts on type. I always like to start with Isabelle Briggs Myers because she's kind of the mother of the MBTI. She says introverted thinking types use their thinking to analyze the world, not to run it. They focus their thinking on the principles underlying things rather than on the things themselves. So, one difference you might notice between thinking perceiving types and thinking judging types is thinking judging types want to have information in order to take action and organize something in the external world. Whereas thinking perceiving types want to understand it more than they want to like take action on it. Now with like ETPs, because they're extroverts, they are naturally more action oriented, so it's going to look a little bit more actionable. But for introverted thinking, the idea is I want to analyze the thing more than I want to just run the thing or use the thing. And an example of this can be like if I get a new iPhone, I'm an INTJ, so I just want to figure out how to use it to get done what I need to get done. I really don't care about understanding the operating system and like all the ins and outs of how the iPhone works. If it's a thinking perceiving type, when they get an iPhone, they're typically going to be like, let me figure out all the bells and whistles of this iPhone so I can understand how the whole thing works and have this really thorough understanding of the thing. So that can be a difference that you'll see between TJ and TP types. Um, Joel Mark Whitt and Antonia Dodge, the creators of the Personality Hacker podcast, say if you strongly identify with this function, introverted thinking, from the time you were a little kid, you were extremely aware of incongruities and inconsistencies, especially inconsistencies of thought. So this can look like, I don't know, your parents give you a rule, but they don't follow the rule themselves. So you argue about it. You say, well, that's not consistent because you're not doing that. And a lot of times, thinking perceiving kids growing up are reprimanded a lot for arguing because they will very quickly spot these inconsistencies. And a lot of times, adults don't explain things to kids in a really thorough way. They're just kind of like, my word is law. And to save time, I just need you to do what I'm saying. I don't need you to know why I'm asking you to do it. And that's very difficult for thinking perceiving kids or even feeling judging kids who have introverted thinking in their stack. Denzel, do you have any thoughts on this yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can definitely see this. I have an ENTP nephew, and his parents are ESFJ and ESFP, and already from a young age, like it was just you can just see like how like he finds the loopholes to things or he asks certain questions that it frustrated his parents because they didn't want to have to explain certain things but for him like it has to make sense, like and I think that I heard from another ENTP that I had profiled one time, or I actually watched be profiled by one of my instructors, and the ENTP said something like, "Rules rules are there to keep us safe. But if the rule is not keeping us safe, then it's stupid, and so therefore I can break it." Something like that. And so from that kind of notion, um, it's essentially like TI, especially like in children, they are often looking at um the people they're often looking at they're often the ones who are like catching like, okay, well, that's not really a reason for you just saying like, oh, because I said so. Or they're the ones who are catching like, but didn't you say that we shouldn't do this because XYZ? And so now doesn't now what you're doing like contradict with that? Like they're catching these things. And for them, it could seem like they're trying to like just push your buttons and get under your nerves and everything. But for them, it really just has to make congruent logical sense, or else they pretty much don't really respect certain things. And so I just feel like it's something that for children, especially who have it like higher up, you can really see them like probing in this way. And it's important to kind of make sure that you're providing that like that congruity with them, and not be as inconsistent, because they'll definitely catch that and they'll call you out on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we have a question from Elena. She says, what is the difference between NI and TI? Does NI categorize? So, introvert NI is a perceiving function. It's not a judging function. So, it isn't your primary decision making function, although it does inform your decisions to a degree. So, introverted intuition is focused on spotting patterns, ripple effects. It's focused on abstract concepts and theories. And it's not so much focused on categorizing data into these like little, like, very organized inner frameworks. Although if you are an INFJ, you have introverted, or an ENFJ, you have introverted intuition and introverted thinking together. So a lot of times your cognitive functions do kind of play together in, they merge in different ways. And so it may feel a little bit like you're using TI with some NI thrown in, or NI with some introverted thinking thrown in. Um, but NI in and of itself isn't the focus isn't on categorizing data in these frameworks. It's more focused on spotting these kind of long-term ripple effects, looking behind the scenes, seeing like making predictions, spotting possibilities, and kind of conceptualizing future results and things like that. What about Denzel? Do you have any thoughts from Elena to kind of help her like differentiate between those two?
Yeah, I would say that TI is it's like TI is more of the opinions that you've created and landed upon based off of the data that you've received, for lack of better terms. Like it's after looking at the data and the information and kind of collecting all of it, then you now start to like clean slice it, and you start looking at the information in a way to see like, okay, what's inconsistent, what's incongruent, what's consistent, and then now what do I believe based off of this. TI is also, it's tethered to FE. So I think that you have to compare it with FE, whereas like FE is looking at what does everybody think about this, and versus TI is like what do I think about this. So everybody like could be thinking that, oh well, it's wrong uh to do euthanasia. It's wrong to abort somebody. It's wrong to whatever. Like FE has these like things like it's wrong to do that. Whereas like TI is like, okay, but why is it wrong, and how does it make sense for it to be wrong, and what do I logically think myself, regardless of what anybody else might think, even if it might get me canceled, even if it might get me put on the stake or like crucified. Maybe I won't vocalize what the thought is, but what do I think, not polluted from what everybody else's thoughts are. And TI is like looking for accuracy and not being biased in a way. Whereas NI is not necessarily looking to have a conclusion of an opinion of some sort, but it's a perceiving function, as Susan said. And so NI is more looking at a situation and trying to uncover the deeper meaning, the symbolism behind it that may never even get verified, because it's like reading into something. It's like, oh, this is an omen that is that I'm interpreting from said thing, or it's more abstract in nature, and it's going off of SE as well. So it's less to do with like the opinions of society and how everybody's feeling in that way, and it's more about what you're actually perceiving and what's bubbling up from those perceptions. um Hopefully that made sense. But yeah, and I would say it's not really categorizing, especially not in the same way that TI is categorizing. Like TI is like putting things in like certain places in a way, whereas I don't see it doing much of that in the same fashion.
Thank you, Denzel. I do think that's helpful. Thank you for sharing that. Um, some people aren't sure whether they're thinking judging types or thinking perceiving types, or what the difference is between extroverted thinking and introverted thinking. So let's kind of compare and contrast them a little bit. So both thinking functions. So they're both interested in making logical decisions. They're both interested in looking at what's like objective and stepping out of a situation to see the facts, and just like not getting really emotionally convoluted in a situation. But extroverted thinking is focused on organizing the external world, whereas introverted thinking is focused on organizing the internal world, like the world of the mind. That's why it focuses on a lot of like mental models, or you hear words like mental blueprint or inner framework and things like that. Whereas for an extroverted thinking type, it's more external. How can I organize my external world to achieve a certain objective? And where Isabelle Briggs said introverted thinking is focused on analyzing things more than running them, extroverted thinking is more focused on running things. Like, I have a goal I want to reach. If I'm going to organize my external world to reach this. So, extroverted thinking creates systems that support people and processes based on shared rules, standards, structures, and procedures. So, extroverted thinking is like, well, it makes sense that we adopt this basic universal rule for everyone because it's going to make things more efficient in order to reach these, to support people or to reach these specific goals. Whereas introverted thinking isn't as focused on these, kind of externally controlling things via rules, procedures, and structures. It's interested in creating mental models of criteria, categories, and logical principles. Um, so, three words that can define extroverted thinking are regulating, planning, and enforcing. And three words that are great for describing introverted thinking are naming, defining, and understanding. So, for an introverted thinking type, you'll find that they're very precise with words. Precision is very important to introverted thinking types. They don't just want to give a general idea of something and move on, and whatever words I throw in, it's fine, as long as the main point is clear. You tend to be kind of nitpicky with words, and like, this exact word just perfectly describes the thing I want to say, and they tend to have very broad vocabularies, and naming things just right and understanding them thoroughly and in depth is very important. Extroverted thinking is more focused on, give me enough information that I can make a really progressive, effective decision and move forward and take action. And it's less particular about naming and defining and things of that nature. Um, I have some quotes from some introverted thinking types here just to kind of give you an idea of like how they thought and how we can even see a little bit of introverted thinking in them. So we talked about principles earlier, and Abraham Lincoln's a great example. A lot of people type him as INTP, and I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do believe he uses introverted thinking. And he said, as I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. This expresses my idea of democracy. And I think it's a great example of that guiding principle. I wouldn't want to be a slave, so I don't want to be a master. I'm not going to do that. Then we've got Larry Page. He was one of the founders of Google. And he said, I find that pursuing truth is more important than trying to control people. And I think that's also, like we were just talking about, introverted thinking isn't interested in running the world. It just wants to understand the world and how things work in it, and also wants to pursue truth. I've never known a thinking perceiver who didn't have a huge desire to understand truth. Harrison Ford, many people type him as an ISTP, and this goes to the whole precision with words. He said, I get mad when people call me an action movie star. Indiana Jones is an adventure film, a comic book, a fantasy. I mean, it's like, no, that's not the exact correct word. So I get mad when people call me that because this movie it's this, and this. And so that's something that you'll find with thinking perceivers is sometimes they get annoyed if you use a word to describe something and it's not exactly as accurate as it could be. Whereas if it's a thinking judging type, they'd be like, fine, whatever. It's action. It's all the same. And a thinking perceiver type would be like, it is not all the same. It is not at all. I'm so offended that you would even say it's all the same. So that's just, I think, kind of a fun example of introverted thinking, how it really wants those precise words. And then Miyamoto Musashi, he wrote a book called oh gosh, I've read it so many times. I think it's like the Five Rings or something like that, and now it's like blanking in my mind. He said, "From one thing, know 10,000 things," and this kind of speaks to the whole, with introverted thinking types, they tend to have like categories and then all these subcategories and subcategories beneath that, and so they tend to know a lot about many different things. And if you read his book, which again, my mind just went blank on the name, but I think it's called The Five Rings or something similar to that. It's like literally a list of principles. I mean, it's a bunch of principles for the warrior, but also for life. And I think it's a really amazing example of like an ISTP at their best. Like, I think he was a great example of an ISTP. Um, so these are all my slides on introverted thinking, and I think that it gives a pretty clear overview, basically, of what introverted thinking looks like. I would love to know, Denzel, because I've been talking for a while, if you have any more thoughts on introverted thinking, or maybe questions you get a lot from people you're profiling about introverted thinking. Um, just any other thoughts you might have on the subject.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to introverted thinking, like I said, I think the biggest aspect of it is, what do you think aside from what everybody else thinks? Like, I've had not to, be fresh, but I've had thinking perceiver types actually argue to me, not that they themselves were pedophiles, but they would pretty much like they would pretty much say, well, technically, because they're scrutinizing, like, the social construct, like, well, back in the day, people used to actually get married at the age of 14 or whatever, and so this is just kind of like a social construct, and it's, whatever. And again, that's not to say like that's right or wrong, but it's kind of like, this is how it makes sense to me, and this is just literally like what I think. And so, and it's unemotional. It's just like, oh, this is just what the logical thing, like, this is how it makes sense to me, this is my math. And then if somebody else is able to come and give them a different kind of math that they can maybe, like, look at and subscribe to, then it's like, oh, okay, now I see why maybe we have redefined our social structure to not go by that anymore, or whatever it might be. But introverted thinking is more of like, okay, yeah, like, what do I think aside from like what everybody else thinks, even if it means that, it might get me quote unquote canceled or something like that. I also see introverted thinking as constantly treading back, retreading old ground to see like its code. This is something that Antonia Dodge talked to us about in class. Like, introverted thinking is always going back to reevaluate what it's learned, what it's thought, what it thinks. Like, okay, is this religious belief still serving me? And why do I still believe it? Is it still true to me with the new information that I've gathered now? Does this still hold? Oh, what about this? Like, it's being radically honest with yourself, and then also being radically honest with other people. Now, to be radically honest doesn't mean that you are not using any tact. And I think that that's where extroverted feeling kind of comes in. If you have that extroverted feeling integrated with your introverted thinking, you can tell the truth, but in love. I think that that quote, or that aphorism, is the embodiment of FE and TI, like, coming together, like telling the pure 100% truth, but making sure that your delivery of the truth is not adding to any of the harm that the truth itself might have, but also the delivery of the truth is not diluting the truth itself, the effect that the truth itself might have. So I think that that's another thing. Like, introverted thinking is all about finding the truth. It's all about retreading old ground. It's about, like, logical inconsistencies. So like, studying stuff like formal debate, and also really being able to understand, like, the logical fallacies. Like, well, that doesn't really make sense because boom and boom, like, that's a red herring, or that's a no Scotsman fallacy, or that is actually an appeal to authority or appeal to ignorance, like. And it's questioning things like, well, how do you know that? Or like, why do you think that? And it's double checking the math, and it's doing that even, once again, like, for itself. Like, how do I know this? And hmm I know that I believe this my whole life, or I know that I adopted this thought like 2 years ago, but now do I still think this? So it's always reevaluating, again, like, what it thinks. And it has a rigorous process of retreading that old ground, to be able to make sure that it has clean coding in a way. So it's also looking over its principles, and yeah, things of that nature. But yeah, all in all, I think that essentially, like, covers introverted thinking. Um, yeah. I think you're muted.
Yep, I always so I think that what you brought up about healthy introverted thinking does integrate some extroverted feeling as well. Like when you're making decisions, you have two judging functions, and you don't want to just go full speed ahead with necessarily introverted thinking. You want to also consider the perspective that extroverted feeling is offering, which is what Cutthroat Beast is saying here. He says, I always consider FE when using TI. And if you're new to the
That's
cognitive
good for
functions
a
and you're like,
cutthroat beast to do.
I know, right? So I think, like if you're new to this and you're like, what's FE? Again, that's extroverted feeling. So if you're a feeling judger type, then extroverted feeling is your primary decision making function. And that's focused on how do people feel? How are people going to respond? What are people's emotions? What interpersonal dynamics are at play? And what social values are at play? And then if you are a thinking perceiver, then introverted thinking has precedence. And that's what we just talked about. What is logically consistent? What's true? What aligns with those logical principles? Um, and so, but you should, feeling judging types, they do integrate introverted thinking into their decisions as well. When they might, when it's unhealthy, feeling extroverted feeling can be like, I'm so focused on pleasing everyone or being all things to all people that I forgot what I even think about things. Now that's like extremely unhealthy extroverted feeling, but most feeling judging people you meet are somewhere in the average category where they do care about what people think. They are focused on those social values, but they do from time to time, they're like, what actually do I think? Or is this even logical that I am going along with a group like this? Maybe I should be more skeptical in my own mind of like what I'm doing and think this through a bit more. So, and in the same way, thinking perceivers are not just focused on like railroading everyone with their truth when they're healthy. A lot of thinking perceivers are actually conscious of how people feel, and they actually really don't like when they when they inadvertently offend people's values or make people mad. Especially I've noticed with ITPs. Like INTPs and ISTPs are actually can be very shy and very self-conscious about how they come across. um, so, me as an INTJ, like I see this in like family situations. I'm dealing with some family issues myself, with my extended family, and like in those situations, I tend to just where people are saying all these different things, and maybe there's argument or something like that. I tend to just speak my mind very bluntly and just say, well, this is what makes sense. And, I don't really care that much how everyone feels about it at a certain point. Whereas I actually noticed that the thinking perceivers are more conscious of the emotional dynamics of the room than I am as a thinking judger. Um, and so one way to differentiate TJ types tend to, if you're like, oh, am I a TP or a TJ? TJ types, they do care about people, but it's not that they don't care, but they tend to care a little bit less about maintaining emotional equilibrium for the room. Whereas thingy perceiver types, they actually are more conscious of like that emotional equilibrium of the room and like how they're affecting it. And with ITPs, a lot of times it's like they don't want it affected badly, but they're also not sure whether they will or they won't. So they can kind of ruminate a long time if they're not in a comfortable space before they say what they really think. Now, if they're in a comfortable
Yeah.
space, they can be like really like blunt and just like go on and on and on about all the introverted thinking all these ideas, theories, like all the facts and categories in their brain. So, but it's whether or not they're really in a good comfort zone. Um,
Yeah, I think one example would be I on my personal YouTube channel, I profiled an ISTP named Linford. He's actually my cousin, and he told a story in that session where pretty much he's like, I asked him like, do you have you ever like accidentally hurt other people's feelings? He's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, okay, do you have like any stories? He's like, oh yeah, yeah. Even recently, like today at my job, or like yesterday at my job, like it was very recent. He was like, this lady, my coworker, she came in and she asked, do I notice anything new about her? And I said no. And then she was like, are you sure that you don't notice anything new about me or whatever? And I look at her more and I said no. And then she called, and then and then he was like, and then she said, so you're saying that you haven't noticed that I lost 30 pounds? And he's like, no, I did not notice that you lost 30 pounds. And then there's a pause and he literally says just like this, and she called me an asshole. And I busted out laughing, but he looked so confused because he was not expecting that. And then he goes on to explain, like, like I could have said, yeah, I could have lied, I could have, whatever, but I really was trying to be honest. I was honest. I did not notice that she lost 30 pounds. But then he went even further and said, you know, if you are 180 pounds and then you lose 30 pounds, yeah, that makes it different. But if you're like 300 pounds and you lose 30 pounds, no, I'm not going to notice. And he wasn't saying that to necessarily be mean, but it's like this is just what makes sense. And this might
Right.
be a lot of things that like people will think in their heads, like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Like, yeah, 300 minus 30 pounds, yeah, you're probably not going to really notice. Whereas like 180 minus 30 pounds, you're probably going to notice, sure. But most people would not say that because they're like, oh, we know that it could hurt somebody's feelings or whatever. He was not trying to hurt feelings by saying he did not
Yeah.
notice or anything. It's just, this is just what I think. And they get surprised when it's like, was not everybody else thinking this? Like, I was being
Yeah.
honest. I was just seeing what I really actually think. And all of a sudden now people are trying to stone me. They're saying that they want to cancel me and this. I'm just trying to make sense of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really difficult, if for thinking perceiving types. I feel like especially, well, for all of them to some degree, but especially like I've noticed with, especially with ITPs, is like because they do it so much when they're kids, where they're just like, "Oh my gosh, you're so mean, you're so thoughtless, blah blah blah," and it's like people don't realize that just because extroverted feeling is inferior for them. I mean, people don't even know this because a lot of people don't even know about type. That like they think, "Oh, this kid just doesn't care about people, or they're mean, and all these things." And inferior extroverted feeling is sensitive. It actually wants harmonious interactions. It doesn't want to be the bad guy. Like it wants to
Correct.
get along with people. And so when you're
Yeah.
constantly reprimanded for being mean or saying the wrong things, it can create this kind of like social anxiety. And not that all
Yep.
ITPs have social anxiety, but many I've met do, where they're just like, it's like they were like traumatized and so beat up emotionally as children for just being themselves.
And so
And
now
it's
they're afraid
really
to speak
sad.
their opinion.
And now
Yeah.
they go to social situations, they're like, "I don't even wanna open my mouth because I don't know when I'm gonna step on a minefield and everything's just gonna go crazy,"
And
and
then
so I
because they're insecure with the extroverted feeling as well, then it's hard for them to manage the energies. Like, oh, if I blow this, if I explode this, then I won't have the competency, the social competency, if you will, to be able to mend this. So instead, I'm just gonna not say anything. That way I don't start any fires that I don't know how to put out.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, the world itself, I mean, I'm speaking for, the US culture. It doesn't place as much value, I think, on introverted thinking as it does on other functions. Extroverted thinking, it's really easy to see the value there because it's achieving, big through the process of creating this organization and procedures and standards and going after these external measures, you can see objectives reached, you can see metrics. Whereas introverted thinking is more on understanding things. And so introverted thinking types come up with these ingenious um, like revelations and original thoughts and things like that. But maybe they aren't reaching the metrics, or maybe aren't the highest earning types or things like that. And so people often underestimate them, or they just call them like pedantic and annoying when they like try to clarify thoughts for people. And so I think it's a difficult world for a lot of introverted thinking types, even though we have some great introverted thinking, successful introverted thinking types out there. I mean, like Elon Musk. I know a lot of people love to hate on Elon Musk, but I mean, he's doing pretty well. So I mean, there's some people who are introverted thinking types who've made great impacts and do amazing things. But I do think it's a tough world out there for introverted thinking types. And that brings me to, does anyone watching have any questions about introverted thinking? Because me and Denzel, we would love to answer those. So if you have a question, feel free to ask that in the comments. We want to have an interactive experience with you. while we're waiting, see if any questions come through, um, I'll talk a little bit about maybe what unhealthy introverted thinking looks like versus healthy introverted thinking. We touched on it just a tiny bit, but basically, when introverted thinking is healthy, it is it's very analytical. It can be very wise. It can be very thorough in understanding things, but it is integrating a little bit of that extroverted feeling. So it's also thinking about saying the truth with love, like what Denzel was saying, and not just like trampling other people's opinions and values and having to be right at the expense of like their relationships and things like that. Um, and when introverted thinking is unhealthy, it doesn't really speak the truth with love. It just constantly spouting off arguments and exceptions, and can lose sight of the overall point someone is making by pointing out these technicalities that are in the way. So I have one kid who has introverted thinking, and I'm not bashing on this kid. It was just something that happens. An example. So I'm teaching my 5-year-old how to read, and I'm saying, okay, so the CH sound when it's together says ch, and the 5-year-old's like cha, right? And the TP kid's like, well, technically that's not always the case, and I'm like, it doesn't matter right now, okay? It just doesn't matter right now. For a 5-year-old, he just needs to know that CH says ch, right? And when introverted thinking is like um immature, which it pretty much is going to be, with children, or when it's like unhealthy, it loses the point and just focuses on spotting all these technicalities and over correcting people to where it's just kind of annoying to be around. You're like, that's not, I know that there's this technicality that we could consider, but that's not the point of this conversation. Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that that is pretty much like the epitome of introverted thinking. Like, well, technically, it reminds me of an interaction that I noticed one time with my ISFP friend and my ISTP friend. I overheard them having a conversation. I'm gonna butcher it a little bit, but the essence of it was the ISFP was like, yeah, I actually saved on the way home, like I actually saved a bumblebee. And then the ISTP was like, wait, how do you know that it was a bumblebee? Like, did it have like a stinger on there? And then he was like, well, I mean, no. But then he was like, because if it didn't have a stinger, then it could have been. I wish I remember like the details, but pretty much the ISTP kept on like asking all these questions, like, but if they don't have a stinger, then it probably is this. But then if like, was it furry? Like he was really like getting like specific about the technicalities. And eventually the ISFP was pretty much like, man, I don't really know. Like, cause the ISFP was like, if it wasn't that, then it's probably a carpenter bee, or if it's probably like actually like this type of bee, or maybe it was a wasp. But then finally the ISFP was like, all I'm saying is I saved the baby bee today. like, like that was all that he wanted to say. And then yeah, like it's like what type of bee that he saved was irrelevant to the conversation. He accidentally said bumblebee or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like it doesn't matter what the species of bee was, I saved one. Whereas the
Yeah.
ISTP was like, well, what specific type of bee were you saying? Because technically that wasn't really a baby bumblebee. That might have been a baby carpenter bee, or it could have been a baby wasp, because wasp, the distinctions between them is boom, boom. And TI is always about distinctions. It's always like, okay, this
Yeah.
word versus this word versus that word. And it likes to split hairs. And so that
Oh
could
yeah.
become very frustrating for other people when in actuality, like that's just where that's where they thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is such a perfect example. In fact, it's one of those examples that I have in one of my favorite books on cognitive functions called Building Blocks of Personality Type. One of the examples they use of introverted thinking is the wife is like, "Ah, there's a bug, kill it." And the husband's like, "Well, first I need to find out what kind of bug it is, how to properly dispose of it, what its habitat is, like things like that. So it needs to know all more information, and it needs to have the right category to name and define. Like we talked about, introvert thinking is understanding, naming, defining, and it needs to define the problem before it acts on the problem. And
Yeah.
yeah, if you are a TJ parent, I'll just use speaking for myself, and you have like TP children, you might just feel like you're constantly having to like deal with this hair splitting. You're just like, oh my gosh, I don't care about the technicality. Like, we're just moving forward with the information needed to like, and that's extrovert thinking. What information is needed to accomplish this specific task? That's what I'm going to go on. I don't care about all the other information. I just am going to use this 5% of my information to move forward. Whereas introverted thinking is
Mhm.
like, let's look at all the technicalities, and so sometimes introverted thinking can like kind of over explain, but sometimes it's not over explaining. Sometimes, like if you are a thinking perceiving parent, that kind of explanation of like the in-depth categorization, like let's talk about the different kinds of bugs rather than just squish the bug. Like sometimes that's what kids need to know, and sometimes that's actually really helpful, and they can actually be really good teachers. And I feel like a lot of college professors I've met in my life have been thinking perceivers. They're just like, they love going into more thorough analysis to really help the people understand in depth the concepts or the facts. Whereas,
Correct.
as a TJ type, sometimes my weakness can be like, let's just focus on getting the job done. Like, do we really have to explain this so much? And it can be kind of like impatient with that, like curiosity. So it's something that, everybody, regardless of your type, needs to focus on enveloping introverted thinking into the fold of your personality a little bit, because we all need it. We all need it. We have a thought comment from, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but Lathy. And she said, I just realized that I have always been an introverted thinker. This resonates with me. I will keep quiet, but have many thoughts. And um, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that, it's the time to explore sharing those thoughts. And I mean, many like feeling perceivers too, just not saying that you're a feeling perceiver, but if you're watching this and you're thinking, which one am I? A lot of times feeling perceivers kind of hold on to their thoughts a little bit too. Any like introverted judging function is a little bit less um, directive in the external world. And so, but introverted thinking types, they can focus less on running things and organizing things and delegating than like a TJ type would. And feeling perceivers are less about focused on like maintaining social order or kind of guiding people socially than like feeling judging types would be.
Yeah, and I think that feeling perceivers don't usually hold back their thoughts because they're afraid of offending somebody. Whereas thinking perceivers, they usually hold back their thoughts because they're like, man, anytime I open my mouth, I'm not even trying to, and somebody's offended. I think that that's like more of like what it is, where it's like, I'm just gonna
True.
stop talking because I still haven't figured out the pattern of what's gonna actually hurt somebody's feelings and what's not. Like I just thought I was just sharing my thoughts and opinion over here. The next thing you know, somebody just called me racist. I just thought, hey, I was just sharing that, back in the day, um, uh, black people were less educated than white people were, and that's just because black people were not being given the right textbooks and the right type of education. So it's just a fact. It just makes sense, and that's is what it. I wasn't trying to actually be racist here, but okay, maybe I shouldn't share information like that.
Yeah, it's a tough world out there. Yeah, and yeah, with feeling perceiver types, a lot of times when they do speak their thoughts, it's less. Yeah, it's less. Oh no, I don't want to offend anyone. Although depending on like their life experience and enneagram type, that can be different. But a lot of times it's more that their feelings are, they don't feel like they need to know that like they respect the people they're around in order to share their feelings. Like if they don't have respect, they're not going to do it. And also, a lot of times they need to like process them kind of alone more first before they're just like blurting their feelings out in real time. I have a comment from Darnell. They say, I'm an INTP married to ISTP. We have created a rule not to get lost in technicalities or we would get lost in conversation. My question is, how do you balance out your TI with FE without going overboard? Um, Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that since you also are a TIFE type or, well,
Yeah,
FETI type?
yeah. FE, when it's lopsided with TI, when it's lopsided, then it's restraining TI. So those spaces that you go into where it's like, we're not allowed to talk about this. We don't talk about that. Like nobody's allowed to share their personal opinions on things. That's when you have too much FE that's overriding the TI. Now, when you have too much TI and not enough FE, everybody's saying their opinions and thoughts and stuff like that, but it's very tactless, it's very careless, and it's just being expressed, and there's not really it's not really an established safe space. So we're not really sure of other people's intentions. We don't really know, like, wait, are you saying this in a way that's like supposed to be trying to hurt me? And stuff like that. So when FE and TI are both integrated and being done well, like I said, it's saying the truth in love. FE will create a space where, okay, no matter what's said here, we can share these thoughts and these opinions, and nobody's gonna be like, "What? That's racist," or "That's this," or "That's." Instead, they're gonna be like, "Oh, interesting. Let's calibrate that. Let's workshop that. Let's work on that. Let's like in an impersonal way, let's work this thought out in a civil manner. That way Ti is not being hidden or shamed, but it's also not running rampant and causing a lot of trouble without a bridle.
Thank you, Denzel. I appreciate that. He also said, for context, he works in data and systems and constantly wanted to do counseling, but no, he knows he'd burn out. How do you get the harmony feel without going overboard? So, as that the idea that you want to get harmony and connect with people and like help people in interpersonal ways, but without like overwhelming yourself. I'm wondering if that's the question. And because yeah, I mean, if you are an INTP, then if you're doing a lot of interpersonal connection and like trying to manage emotions and things like that, that can be very like your stamina for that can get worn out pretty fast. Um, so if your question is like how to engage in extroverted feeling without going overboard, without like overwhelming yourself, I would focus on first of all just making sure you're getting time, ample time, the rest of your day to do things that are natural for you and easy. Like if you're an introverted thinking type and you're working in, I think you said data and systems, so maybe you get a lot of time for introverted thinking. And so where's a way that you can, maybe take some time to practice with extroverted feeling in small amounts to see how it goes, but then always like if you're a counselor, and I actually have known, I think I knew an INTP who did counseling that I met through typology somehow or other. And I think what he did was like he would do his sessions and then he would have to take a half hour break and just, just like get alone, recharge, like fiddle with, on Wikipedia or learning different things and then jump back into a session. But he had to have these big, breathing room between sessions. And then he still like when he'd get home needed more breathing room, like if I think he had a couple kids and it was like I need 45 minutes when I get home to go and fiddle on my computer or like meditate or exercise or just be alone. And I think, if you're looking at doing something involving a lot of emotions and a lot of, personal work with people, then you just have to really cushion those sessions or that time with time to recharge yourself. I don't know, Denzel, do you have any thoughts on that for Darnell?
I think that actually you covered that really well. Yeah, I don't have any extra thoughts to go with that.
Yeah, yeah, I feel like with if you're an ITP, sometimes extroverted feeling can feel a little like if you, it can feel a little triggering, sometimes at first, like because of the, like the insecurities we talked about, or because, your just battery can run out faster. But the great thing is, like, our brains are malleable to a degree. Like, we can build up our stamina for these kinds of things. And if you're someone, who's approaching counseling, or if you're approaching interpersonal relationships, you can actually approach interpersonal relationships from an introverted thinking standpoint and have a great time. Like, you're talking to someone new, and that person's of their own unique puzzle. Like, what categories of information are you getting from that person? And how you kind of can create these little blueprints of these people in your mind and be curious about them. And if you learn how to be curious about people and kind of puzzle piece them together without devaluing them and impersonalizing them, if you can do that while, like, affirming them and validating it, so you're kind of having this really happy interplay between introverted thinking and extroverted feeling, that I think INTPs could be really effective counselors, because they might see truths about people that another type would be maybe miss. But if they can integrate the extroverted feelings, so they can give these truths lovingly and in a helpful, affirming way, then I think that would be really effective. So
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that any type can do any job. They're just going to have their own flavor of being that type of career person. I don't like it
Mhm.
when people feel like they have to limit themselves because of their personality type. I think an INTP counselor might be awesome because they would just be like, especially for maybe a thinking type clients. But yeah, I think it was really fun to those were some good questions. They were challenging and good. Thank you so much for asking these. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. I really appreciate it. I think that next week, and I need to clarify this with Denzel, but either next week or the next week after, we'll be doing extroverted thinking. And
Correct.
so if you would like to learn more about how TJs think, then tune in next week and ask your questions. I'm sure you guys have some good questions about extroverted thinking. But thank you so much for being here today with us. It was great to interact with you, and I hope that you have a better understanding of introverted thinking as a result. If you want to know more about introverted thinking or your personality type, you can always check out my website at psychologyjunkie.com. I have hundreds of articles about the types. Some are kind of just fun and like, here's which Jane Austen character you are, and some are deeper. Like, I have some deeper articles about shadow functions or the cognitive functions. If you're not sure what your personality type is, and you're kind of been waffling between 1, 2, 3, or 16 different types, I would highly suggest talking to Denzel Mensah. He is my go-to profiler when I have a friend or family member that I'm like, I can't quite pin down their type. He's really easy to talk to. He's really fun to talk to, and he's really insightful, and just can really help you to either clarify your type, or he does life coaching as well. So Denzel, can you tell people how to reach you if they're interested in being profiled by you?
Absolutely. If you go to denzelmensa.com, you'll be able to book me for profiling sessions where I'll sit down and I'll interview you for hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, depending on the type of case that it is. And I will be able to confirm what your best fit Myers-Briggs type is. And then from there, if you would like coaching, I also offer coaching services to help you become the best version of yourself on that same site. And yeah, that's essentially it. I offer coaching. I offer relationship coaching, and that's usually where my specialty is. But mainly, it's like helping you better your relationship with yourself and with other people. And even I'm a very spiritual person, so with the divine, with God, if you are into that as well.
Thank you, Denzel. I really appreciate that. Thanks for joining me. Thank you, everyone who showed up today. It was a lot of fun. And please join us next week as we talk about extroverted thinking. I'm excited to see you then, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone.